Good morning, everyone. This is Clarissa and
Maria.
And we are both here in Brisbane, ready to have a chat to you today about a topic that I think is a bit of a hard one, but a great one, and one that we're both really passionate about in terms of helping children after separation and divorce, moving between their two homes. And it's a really big topic. So just in preparing this, I know Maria's done most of the preparation and we'll do most of the talking today, but there's a huge amount in this topic. So we've got an hour. We'll give you as much information as we can, but we're conscious that we probably can't cover absolutely everything. And as we're going, please do feel free to type through your questions. Hopefully you can see us. Let us know if you can hear us. We've got a number of people that are listening at the moment. So yeah, just let us know if you can hear us. We've got the largest number of people registered for any of the webinars that we've run. So that's great. And it means hopefully that we're giving you some information that people need. But do fire questions at us as we go.
Absolutely.
It certainly helps us to make sure that we're talking about the things that you need. So this is me. Clarissa. I'm the director here at Brisbane Family Law Centre, and I'm a family lawyer and a mediator and a collaborative lawyer. I'm also known as the Happy Family Lawyer, and I think most of you listening today have probably come through from Facebook or from some connection to me, and you would know that I do a lot of writing about divorce and separation and different ways that we can help each other out. You can find me here in Brisbane at the firm. And this is Maria.
This is me. Just to start off, I'm a generalist psychologist, so I'm not going to be talking real specifics about developmental psychology, as that's not my profession, but I have worked in sort of alongside the family law industry and collaborative law, I suppose, for about 10 years now. I've worked at FRCs as a FDRP or a mediator. I coordinated the Parenting Orders program and actually wrote the program for Relationships Australia here in Brisbane. And I also coordinated the family law, I've forgotten the name of it now.
Pathways.
Sorry, I'm thinking, what's the name of it? The Family Law Pathways Network for Brisbane and the greater Queensland area for many years. So I may not be a developmental psychologist, but I've worked with thousands upon thousands of people over the years, and most specifically high conflict court-mandated clients with the Parenting Orders program. So that's where I'm positioned as far as this is, as Clarissa said, a very passionate topic for me. And I hope I can give you some good tips to help support your children as they move between homes, because we were very specific about naming it My Two Homes, because we hear all too often mum's place or dad's place, or we have to make sure our language positions the children that they actually have two homes, because that's the very case, that they've got two homes that love and support them. So we were very specific in naming it that for a reason.
Yeah. All right, let's get into our sort of topic today. So I should say thank you everyone that's telling us that you can hear us. That's great. I always worry about the technical side of these webinars. If you're watching live, something that I've learned running a few of these now is that time to time, if you're running a number of things on your computer, or if your data is just cranky for whatever reason, you may drop out. If that happens, just log back in using the link that you would have used and it should bring you straight back up. But this is being recorded, and at the end of the webinar today, you'll get a copy of that recording so you can go back and listen to it in your own time, of course. So separation and divorce, what do we know?
Oh, we know lots. We've got about 40 years of research now to tell us that it's actually a really, really tough time for everybody involved. And mum, dad, children, extended families all suffer terrible stress. But the first thing I want to tell you all is that the dust does settle over time, but we do know how we manage the process and how we support our children through it will very much determine their resilience throughout life. We know that the biggest impacts on children are the adjustment to the conflict, most particularly, and the parent's adjustment to the situation, so the quality of their parenting throughout that process. We see how we determine children's coping and adjustment. We look very much at their behaviours, because a lot of the children we deal with aren't in a developmental age to be articulate about what's really happening for them. So we observe their behaviours and take it from there. But we look at adjustment and we look at the different stresses on their lives, and we know that the children's interpretation or their observations are very much according to the developmental stages. And we'll go through those a bit later, but there's very distinct indicators that we can find at different stages around their adaptation and their adaptation to the processes that are going through and how they're coping.
And I think my simple world, being a lawyer, I like to make things simple. The way I've really come to understand all of the research is in this very simple way. Divorce and separation doesn't harm children. It really doesn't. But what does harm children are some of the fallout or the effects of divorce and separation, conflict being the main one. So whether you're separating or not, if there's conflict in a relationship, it will have an impact on your children, and a significant impact. And I know you're going to talk more about this, Maria. But divorce itself and separation itself doesn't have a negative impact on children unless you're allowing that conflict to flow into their lives and then really become a part of their lives moving forward.
Absolutely.
So much of what people will hear from us today is about minimising that.
Absolutely.
For that reason.
And the perfect example is we see there's a lot of research again around children who live in families that are still united, but the conflict is very, very high, and the outcomes are actually the same.
Yes.
If not worse.
Yes.
Separation in that circumstance where there's a lot of tension, a lot of arguing, a lot of conflict, the outcomes for children are actually better if the parents separate. Because they're not in the war zone the whole time.
Yeah. Some of the risks. So we're just talking about this.
Absolutely. The biggest factor that weighs in around children's adjustment to a separation and a breakdown in a family is the quality of parenting. We know very much around children require authoritative parenting, which is what we call supportive, loving, communicative, addressing all their needs in an appropriate manner, but also maintaining the rules and the boundaries that you would normally have. It's not about being strict and restrictive on children, it's allowing them to grow and flourish without restriction, but also having some life skills and life rules as well. This is really heavily compromised quite often in separation, because unfortunately some parents forget to parent during this time. Some parents, their parenting is implicated because they are struggling themselves. And sometimes we think, well, the children, we sometimes want the children to do so well through a separation, we forget to apply those rules and boundaries that we would normally have. So we tolerate behaviours, or we allow behaviours to slip through that would normally not happen. So it's the ability to actually parent your children and apply the same rules as you had before is really, really important.
Yeah. And I know a few weeks ago we ran a webinar around supporting yourself through separation, and I learned so much from what you shared in that webinar. But one of the key things that you spoke about then was the need to fit your own mask first.
Yeah, absolutely.
The need to make sure that you're okay. And I think for me that really flows into what you're saying there, that if you're not okay as a parent in the sense that you're suffering grief and you're really not coping, which is very normal in a divorce and separation, it does become incredibly difficult to parent. So it is about winding things back and looking after yourself first, getting whatever supports and help you need, but at the same time maintaining that clear parental role.
Absolutely.
Not allowing it to become murky and shifty, and, as you say, letting things go that otherwise you probably wouldn't, which is hard.
Yeah, and we compromise. We often compromise our own beliefs because of a separation. So it's very much about continuing. As you'll hear me say later, nothing should change. We should still continue to parent as we always have. It's really important for our children's attachment, which I'll talk about in a few moments, for them to know they can predict what we're going to do. So if all of a sudden we change the rules, that can destabilise them somewhat. So the most important thing is that we have to connect with our children, we have to communicate with our children, but we also have to parent them. Yeah. We're not their friends. We're their parents, and that's our role in life, and it always will be. So we guide them through this process. And by having some good structure in our parenting, the children actually will develop and come through it the other side quite well.
Flourish.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, some of the other risks.
Conflict, as we talked about. The biggest issue with conflict is that we forget that the children don't need to know the business. All of a sudden, sometimes, unfortunately, children become very, very aware of what parents are fighting about and what's really going on. And so I've heard parents say to me, and I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times, I can't wait till they're older so I can tell them what they were like. I get a little bit annoyed with those sorts of comments because children don't want to know. I'd tell people to shelve their issues when it comes to communicating with their children because the children don't need to know. Adults' world, children's world is one of the language, one of the monikers I use in my Parenting Orders program, because that is about really defining there are things that children, no matter what age, don't need to know about the other parent, because every time you fire or denigrate that other parent, you're actually hitting the child.
Yeah.
So it's more about be very, very aware of your own motivations and informing your children about things, because you can really misfire there and tell them information they don't need to hear. In my private clinical practice, I deal on a daily basis with people who I call the survivors of separation. And the one thing they will resoundingly say now as adults is, I didn't want to know.
Yeah.
I don't need to know that stuff. I just needed to know my parents were okay. So the realities of life are your children, particularly, from the ages of 9 upwards, will start working out exactly what's going on, but they shouldn't have to. And that's what I say, resilience is a wonderful thing, but it's also sad our children have to develop it.
Yeah. So really trying to keep the adult conversation, the adult issues to yourself. Sounds so easy.
Yeah.
Sounds so easy. And there are moments when it's so hard. And I think one of the hardest things I see is when you're the parent that is keeping all of that to yourself, and yet the other parent is operating differently. The other parent is the one perhaps saying or informing or giving, a third of the whole story. And Maria, I'm really interested in your comments on this, but my view is it still doesn't open the door for you to start adjusting that.
No.
And you've got to find different ways of just trying to redirect that conversation, reaffirm with your children that it's okay. Lots of things happen differently. Different people see things differently.
Absolutely.
Whatever's happened, mum and dad love you.
Absolutely. And it is about neutralising those conversations when they do come up. But the thing about communication that I love is communication is only 7% verbal.
Yes.
So I have another saying, I've got many sayings as you'll find out. Silence is the biggest communicator.
Yeah.
So freezing someone out also is a very powerful thing, and it sends a very strong message. But also it really comes down to the non-verbals.
Yes.
When our child mentions the other parent's name or what happened at mummy's home or daddy's home or whatever, whenever they're talking about something coming from the other house or mentioning the other parent, all we have to do is sometimes raise an eyebrow or our shoulders tighten while we're driving home. Children are very, very, particularly younger ones, because most of them aren't as verbal as we are. So they're looking for physical cues, and particularly babies, it's all non-verbal cues. So be very, very aware of your eye rolling or the frown that comes over your face. It's hard work, but unfortunately 93% of our communication is actually non-verbal.
Yes.
Tone of voice is another one. We grit our teeth and talk through our teeth when we're talking about the other parent. Our pace goes up, our vocal tone either decreases or raises. So there's so many ways that children pick up on, oh, this is a bad topic.
Yeah. And then and we're going to talk again about some of this stuff later, but that then flows into, okay, that is a bad topic. And so you see younger children starting to either not have those conversations at all about anything and shutting down themselves, or starting to talk more and more because it's triggering some attention, some response, depending on what reaction you're giving.
Yeah.
And I hear that all the time in my work. And as a family lawyer, you'll often see court orders that say, neither of the parents will denigrate the other, whatever that means.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, good luck with it and good luck enforcing it. And I think the concept makes so much sense at face value, but in a practical sphere, I may not be overtly denigrating someone. I may not be saying bad things about them. But as you say, my mere actions, reactions, body language can be doing so much more damage than the words ever would.
Or more damage.
And that's where I think we do have to be so mindful as parents. It's not easy. Being a parent is not easy, regardless of separation and divorce. Add something like this to it and it becomes so much more difficult. And it is so much about watching your own mannerisms, body language, tone, what you are saying and what you aren't saying. Really hard.
And watching the mixed messages.
Yes.
Because we could be saying, something very pleasant, but the tone of our voice doesn't
Yes,
match.
Yes.
So that can send mixed messages, particularly to the younger children.
Yeah.
And on the basis of court orders, as you say,
Mm.
please don't show your children court orders. And once again, going on what I said earlier, the number of parents that have said to me when they're old enough they will have these orders. Always be mindful of why you're doing that. Why do you have a motivation to show your children the damaging information? And most people, if you're really honest with yourself, it's so that they do have a judgment of the other parent. So be very, very, very honest with why you're choosing to do things and say things, that are unhelpful. We understand I understand the psychology behind it because there's hurt and pain, but the hurt and pain then gets projected onto your child, and that's where the damage lies.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So
next one is parental adjustment to separation. So this is the grief stuff that you mentioned earlier. This is a really tough time. And what we do know is the pain doesn't start with the separation. Quite often there's a long period beforehand of adjustment where things aren't going right. It can be a sudden separation, or it just is a long and torturous, enduring pain before someone finally pulls the pin. We do see a greater incidence of psychological issues, depression, anxiety, grief-related issues, adjustment disorders associated with separation. Interestingly, the children of separation are 20 to 30% more likely requiring professional help as well. So your adjustment to the separation does cloud and compromise parenting on occasion. You can't, I always normalise it around the fact that you're fighting a bit of a battle. So there's nothing wrong with sometimes not being a great mum or a great dad, but just do the best with what you've got at the time. And that's where support around you is very important. But just be very, very aware of how you're travelling. And it's really, really important if you're not travelling well to please seek help, whether it be through a friend, a good friend, a family member, or via professional help, because that does compromise your children moving forward.
Perfect. Such good advice.
Changes, and this is the transitional adjustments I talked about a moment ago, that children who go through multiple transitions are having to, and transitions I mean moving between homes, moving between carers, moving between primary carers, other parents, extended family, daycare, different schools. All those adjustments to life create stress because they're having to adjust at every one. It's like the biggest issue here is children adjust and adapt very readily, but when it's combined with conflict and poor communication and all the other negative risk factors, we do see children having transitional issues like separation anxiety and things like that. So the actual changes that come with a separation can create risk in a child because they're having to adapt and adjust so quickly, and sometimes beyond their developmental age range. So it's about recognising your child will become very, very stressed during this time. So establishing some routines and keeping life as similar as it was is very, very important, so that they've got some familiarity amongst the chaos.
Yes. And I think one of the things you and I both talk about is the notion of holding patterns. And I like to work with clients and get people thinking very short term. When things are really stressful, let's just focus on the next 2 or 4 weeks, next 6 weeks. Let's not try and predict until these kids are at university. Let's just deal with the here and now. And I always feel the weight lift off my shoulders when I start making decisions in a very small time frame as opposed to a much longer time frame. Much more predictable and easy to work with.
I totally agree. And when we've got people who are compromised psychologically or emotionally, I actually bring it even shorter to how are you going to get through the day?
Yes.
What do you need to do today to lift your mood and make sure you can see the positives and keep moving forward?
Yeah. So valuable.
Yeah. The other risk factors that we know of are the actual sharing arrangements, the time sharing arrangements, which we'll probably touch on a little bit later.
Yes.
But they very much heavily impact on children because they may not be appropriate to the children's developmental and emotional needs. So we'll talk about, because those arrangements, if they're inappropriate, create stress in the child and adjustment problems. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And the last one, there's 2 more really. The big one is the introduction of new partners to a child, if not managed well, can cause real confusion, particularly in younger children, anger in older children. So once again, all of these factors are normal life events. It's how you manage it all of these, it's about the management and keeping the children out of the conflict, and keeping life as stable and predictable as possible for them.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the different ages of children and the different developmental stages of children, and therefore the different impacts that separation, divorce and or living arrangements might have on kids. And of course, starting with the youngest age group, the 0 to 2s.
When we look at adjustment, we look very much at the developmental stage, because we know with brain development comes more interpretation of events, and they can understand more events. The 0 to 2 years is a very vulnerable time because they don't have the same cognitive development as a 3 to 4 year old, etc. Children at this age do not understand time. So time sharing is very, very fraught with danger under the 2 years of age, because it's very much about predictability and stability. This is actually a critical period for attachment. What attachment is, and it's a psychological term that really is important in our world now, because we understand attachment to be a relationship of trust that a child builds with its caregiver. Now, it's determined by the consistency, appropriateness and predictability of parenting. So if a child, and we can't always be 100% on our game, so please don't worry that you're not 100% every day. But when a child is distressed or a child has needs, our response as a parent will determine how healthy and securely attached they are. Why attachment is important, it actually allows our children to trust other people and move into a social world with trust. And what we also know, attachment's really, it's a predictor for future relationships. So if they have a relationship of trust with their primary carers, they will then have a relationship of trust with their little friends at kindy, at primary school, high school, and then future relationships. So it's very predictive of the quality of our interpersonal actions and interrelations as we go through life. So, and this 0 to 2 stage is critical, because this is where, if we're unresponsive and inappropriate and the child is not able to predict whether I'm going to get fed or I'm going to get cuddled or picked up or yelled at, this is where anxiety can commence in a baby. And it's a really, really stressful time. The time sharing arrangements are really difficult to manage at this stage.
Aren't they?
It's very difficult, because we have to factor in so much of the developmental issues. If the children, what we would usually see with distress in these years, and it's disheartening and really distressing for parents to see their children going through this, but you'll typically see adjustments in sleeping routines, and you'll see regression in a child that was sleeping through the night no longer sleeps through the night. They can become fretful and clingy or withdrawn. They often don't separate well. We see the biggest one that distresses me when I see it is a child doesn't know how to soothe themselves. And even with the primary carer, that parent can't soothe them as readily. It's quite a distressing outcome. But the one that we see also is you can sometimes have a delay in speech and gross motor skills, and that's purely distress related. Luckily, those bad ones we don't see very often. It's not your normal run-of-the-mill outcome, but you will absolutely see distress at a handover or a transition at this stage, purely because they don't understand that it's only for a few hours. So when you're looking at plans for a child or children within these ranges, you need to keep the timeframes very, very short.
So generally what if I was being a lawyer for a short moment, generally what you'd see is a child usually living with one parent, the primary carer usually, and spending short but very frequent periods of time with the other parent.
Absolutely.
And at this really, if you've separated and you've got a 0 to 2 year old, then it's probably one of the most stressful things that could happen, and particularly if it's your only child, because you've never had the opportunity to observe each other and grow to know each other as parents.
That's
right. So not only are you managing a baby, and anyone who's had a baby knows that is just challenging for anyone. Now you've got this issue of I've got another parent in my life who I don't trust anymore, who I potentially don't love anymore, and who I've never really seen operate as a parent. And that of itself creates so much anxiety. So if you can get this right, everything will flow out of it. And if you can get, sadly, this mucked up, it will create so many problems for you as parents moving forward. So I like with really young kids to focus again on short term. I know with my daughter, when I was going through this age, my daughter's now 4, even just routine. So I was working, my husband was working, and we had all sorts of support to facilitate our daily routine. And I could only plan 4 or 6 weeks at a time because of the shifts in my own child's development.
Absolutely.
And that's how we operated, was just very short term. Okay, that's working at the moment, and now let's try this, and now let's try that. And it's exactly the same here. So you don't, in my view, want to try and put in place a parenting order for a 6-month-old baby that lasts through to 18. It's not going to work. Try a parenting plan, try some sort of agreement, try something for the short term. But it is going to require a huge amount of cooperation and communication, which again is really, really hard. So again, a tip I've seen that works really well is engage someone like Maria, who becomes almost your coach through this period, and can help both parents to really work out what is right for your child right now, get you through this stage, move you into the next stage. Once kids are older, it just becomes easier. Once they're at school, you've got routines you can work with. We'll talk about that. But this, for me, in a legal sense, is the hardest age to work with. Really tough.
And it's the hardest age to work with, even outside of separation, because children's development is really hard. And that's the reason I say that, is because the one thing that we can really do as parents is we can look through the lens of separation on everything that our children are doing, and any behavioural tantrum or any sort of inconsistent behaviour, we can automatically think it's because they've been to mum or dad's place, when in fact they could be coming down with a fever, or they could be unwell, or they're 2. So we forget that their age range also has challenges.
Yes.
So we can be too microscopic when we're looking. We can actually look for issues that aren't there. And that's, once again, that comes down to parenting anxiety. So that we just have to make sure we put everything into a context.
So,
3 to 4. I love these people. They really are gorgeous, because their minds are starting to expand at a rate of knots. And this is the magical years, is what I call them. So this is where they're starting to become literate. So they're having fairy stories, and they're seeing Dora movies and all that sort of stuff. So life is very magical, but so are their reasonings are very magical.
Yes.
So this is where they start assigning causes and reasons for things that are happening in their world around them. So you can imagine that's a little bit fraught with danger when there's conflict. So we often see children in this range sometimes telling little stories that are happening at the other home that are really sometimes quite distorted, because they've got their magical little brain in act. This stage is where they're what we call egocentric, so they are the centre of their own universe, and we're all put on the planet to serve them. So at this stage, as I say, they're glorious when they're in full flight, because we are here to serve them, and they see the whole world through their eyes. They cannot understand the way that you think, or mummy or daddy thinks. It's all the world according to GARP, is what I call it. So the biggest issue with that is, if they're the centre of everything, they're also the reason everything happens. So when something nasty could happen, it's also their fault. So this is where we see children starting to internalise blame for adult world issues. And this is where that keep the conflict shelved is really important, because they will start blaming themselves because mummy or daddy are unhappy. And it must be, I've heard a little fellow actually said to me, this is years ago, that daddy left because he left his tricycle on the driveway. But what he didn't realise, that daddy came in and he drove over he ran his car into the tricycle, but it wasn't about that. He'd already been in a bad mood. He came into the kitchen and the argument ensued. And that's what precipitated the separation. But the little fella thought it was his fault. So this is where that distorted logic, because they're just not as cognitively developed as everybody else, can really play havoc. These are the ages, once again, if it's a distressing period for the children, we'll see regressive behaviours, you'll see toileting issues, you'll see behavioural outbursts that were never there before. They can really get the whinge up and the whine up about things. They're once again, their primary response is usually sadness and tears.
Which just can turn on.
It does.
Like before we started, I was talking to Maria about my morning with my 4-year-old, and I think we had 10 lots of tears in an hour this morning, just about stuff that I was going, What?
Yeah, and that's in the United Family. So imagine how we'd interpret that if they'd just come home from dad's home or mum's home.
Exactly.
So we can be too microscopic, because that's what a 4-year-old does.
Yes.
Because they're having a bad day, and they'll make such hilarious attributions around why.
Yes.
Just really funny excuses. But it's not funny to the parents going through it, so because they can really misinterpret it. What we also see at this age, which is really interesting, is what we call somatic complaints. So we see children having all sorts of tummy aches and constipation issues, or they start soiling their pants, which we don't usually see before. So they are typically signs of distress. But the one thing is the separation anxiety. So when you see the cling at the transition. But it's, once again, don't look too much into this being about separation, but it's all about how you manage it.
Yes, and trying again to be on the same page and
On
having
the same
some mutual
page.
language, and we'll talk about those things in a minute.
Yeah.
I just want to touch on something there, because I've had a couple of questions sent through to me before the webinar began from people that I know can't attend live. And one of the questions was in relation to a 4-year-old and the issue of that child not wanting to speak with or have telephone time with the other parent when the child's in your care. And Maria and I were talking about that before we began, because I know when I'm away for work, I like to try and ring my daughter. I've worked out FaceTime as a far more successful option. And I know my chance of getting her to talk to me, maybe I'm just, an uninterested parent, I don't know. But the chance of her talking to me, I'm lucky to get 30 seconds of hi mum, hi mum, bye mum. Glad you're well. See you later. Goodbye.
And a bit of babble around door or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Or the TV's on, so leave me alone.
Very good point.
And it's just, I guess, we were talking about this before. This is actually really normal with such young kids. And so again, just being a lawyer for a moment, you'll often see orders or parenting plans that have, telephone time twice a week at 6:30 for half an hour. And it's a 3-year-old. And the chance of getting a child to talk to you, in my view, for more than a minute, if you can achieve that, then kudos to you. It's going to be really hard. So try again not to read into that. It is the stage, the age. They're not particularly interested in the telephone / even FaceTime. I do FaceTime because at least I can pull silly faces. It's about the best I can get out of it. But I would say to you, try not to worry about that. And as they get older, it'll get easier.
Oh, you reckon?
Well, true enough. You tell me that once she's 30.
The next stage is easier.
Adolescence
Adolescence will be different.
Ever again.
But it is very much, it's a point of conflict. It's an entry point for conflict, absolutely. Because if you do have every second day for 30 minutes, when there's high conflict around this child, that will become an entry point for, no, she won't let me talk, or he won't let me talk for 30 minutes. Well, children at this age, it's all immediate. It's all the immediacy of the moment, and they might have a lot to tell you, or they might have nothing because they want to go outside and ride their bike, or they were kicking a ball or eating dinner, or just not wanting to because they're so transient in their mood state. So once again, it's about working with the development and the emotional needs of that child.
Yeah. 5-year-olds.
Oh, they're getting smart now.
Tell me about them, because that's me next year.
That's you next year. Strap yourself in.
Oh, dear.
Their thinking is starting to become slightly more abstract. Not around the 5, but as you're getting up towards the 8 or 7, 8, 9, they're able to interpret more, and they're not as black and white. So that's why I say strap yourself in. Unfortunately, because they can interpret more, they're more, they make associations quicker. The neural pathways in their brain are on fire again. They can actually, once again, misinterpret, and they can really start blaming themselves for issues that are going on. The interesting thing about this age range is they can talk more about their feeling states.
Yes.
They can identify them more because, as we said, the 3 to 4 years, I say they've got 4 emotions: mad, glad, bad, and sad. And they do them all really, really well. 5 to 8, they have a little bit of frustration, some jealousy and some joy. And so they've got more layers to their emotions. So they're very expressive. But once again, some of them are quite articulate about their emotions. But once again, we look at their behaviours for cues of distress. And it's very similar across all age ranges. You'll hear me say regression. So this is actually the age where you'll see some projective and externalizing behaviours come through. So this is where you can see children getting naughty, getting into trouble at school where it's never happened before. They can start arguing with their friends, and it can be a really messy time for kids. The anger expressions are quite prevalent. But once again, their primary response to distress at this stage is usually sadness. They are really vulnerable to being stuck in loyalty conflicts because, like throughout all the ages, and they will often articulate a need to see another parent, even if that parent isn't involved in their life, because they have an emotional need to be with that parent. So it's a very, very troubling time, and they're very vulnerable to manipulation at this time.
Yes.
So this is where the conflict has to be kept out of it. They are more likely to attribute, if the parent isn't within their lives, the self-blame becomes abandonment. I wasn't good enough. That's why mummy or daddy isn't in my life. So this is why this is where the emotional stuff really starts to show its face around what's happening conflict-wise with parents, and how the children are reacting, because this age range will very much blame themselves and feel abandoned or rejected.
Yeah,
which is really, really sad. The other thing we see in kids this age is they like to parent the parents because they're a little bit older and they're a little bit more mature. They actually like to make sure that their parents are okay, and every child will do that from 3 to 4 up. If they see a parent in distress, they'll typically want to comfort that parent, and that goes back to the attachment I mentioned earlier, because if the parents are okay, the child is okay.
Yes.
So when they see a parent who might be crying or upset, quite often the child thinks it's their job to fix the parent. They don't have the emotional capacity to do so, and that's where they can become very distressed with the amount of responsibilities they're starting to carry. And what I often hear, and you might have heard this as well, is when you're talking with parents and they say, oh, the children are doing so well, they love me, they care for me, they're keeping me happy in sunshine, it's not their job to look after you. It's sort of a role reversal. They want to because they love you, but be very mindful when a child sort of becomes too much of a parent for you.
Yes, dangerous. All right, slightly older again, 9-year-olds.
Yeah. These ones are getting really good at talking about feelings, and they will express exactly what they think. They will demonstrate loyalties at this stage. They will actively start saying they're going to live with X, Y, Z, or they will very much say who's in the wrong here. They also are very sensitive to arguments.
Right.
So because their brain is developing, they've got more understanding of things, but they're still slightly sensitive to it because they're only young and they don't have the emotional maturity. They will still very much internalise things. Unfortunately, though, they have a very black and white style. So their brain is developing, but they don't have all the knowledge bank that the next age range will have. So it's all either right or wrong, black or white, which can be a problem later on in life because you start to become polar in your views. So it's very much if you're working with these children, try and expand their ideas and understandings of things by looking at other options. Once again, this is where we actually start to see, because we're getting up to prepubescent age, this is where we start to see anger. So this is where we start to see school problems. This is where we start to see more peer problems and often defiant behaviour in school grounds. This is where a child who would normally be a good student and a great sports child, sportsman or woman, start to really struggle. And this often leads to interviews with teachers and things like that. So uncharacteristic behaviours can creep in here as well.
Okay.
Ooh, here we go. This is the tricky one.
This is boarding school.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all I'm saying.
13 plus, let's face it, they know exactly what's going on in the world because they know more than we do. And they do know what's going on. Once again, maybe not accurately because they've formulated, it's just a development of information over the time. But they, at this stage, and this is where you will see a lot, Clarissa, as well in the legal context, is these are the children that very much start to say what they want.
Yes.
As far as time sharing or sharing time with mum or dad, this is where it starts to become a little bit fraught with danger, because this is also the time where children will naturally turn towards peers before their family group. Typically, they will be very influenced by peer contact. So this is where parties become very important in socialising. They all start to get jobs. They all start to become a lot more independent. And when you've got fixed and rigid time sharing agreements or contact arrangements, it's another point of entry for conflict, because a parent sees the fact that the child isn't willing to come or not, is slightly resistant to going because there's a party on. They can personalise that. So this is where you'll see a lot of conflict around Children just starting to say, I don't really want to go to mum's house this weekend or dad's house.
Yes.
I want to just stay home and watch movies. So this is where children actually really get to start having a say.
Yeah. And again, like outside of separation divorce, I think
Yeah.
locally we all know, and we all look back on our own teen years.
I may have one of these.
Yeah, it's not an easy time. And it is a time where, as you say, as teenagers, we're far more interested in our mates, our friends, and our parents. And then put us in a situation where mum and dad are potentially not getting on that well, and therefore it isn't that fun to try and, move between two homes. It's no surprise that kids start pulling to just one camp because it's just easier.
Absolutely.
It's just easier. My life is easier over here.
And sometimes the fact that mum and dad aren't on the same page is a real benefit to these kids, because depending on the spirit of the child, they will use that. And they will actually, they can become part of the conflict by using the situation to their advantage.
Yeah.
So it's a really difficult time, as you say, even without separation in here.
That's why I said boarding school. I'm already
good idea.
I'm
but
ready.
this is where they will always. This is where challenging to authority comes in, whether you're in a united family or a separated family. It's a normal developmental stage, but add the layer of conflict and parents not on the same page, you're in trouble.
And I know we're about to move on to sort of 10 tips, but just, again, listening to you, and it's just reminding me, kids are meant to do these things regardless of separation and divorce. It is all part of growing, learning, developing, being a small human being. So much of what we're talking about is sort of normal behaviour that will probably happen regardless of whether you're an intact family or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
But exactly that. Separation and divorce has the potential to really exacerbate some of the negative behaviours that we as young people will naturally have anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
Again, it is about, as Maria says, not looking at everything through the lens of, because of our separation, Bobby is now doing this, because the two may be entirely separate. Bobby may have always been going to be doing that.
Yes, that's right.
It's just convenient that it happens to be a month after you and your husband or your wife separated.
That's right.
And that is one of the hardest things. And again, I'm going to say, coming and speaking with a professional person such as a psychologist, and ideally even if both of you as parents can do that in the early stages, will give you the opportunity to work out what is in the normal range of craziness and what is something we should be concerned about.
Absolutely.
What is something reacting to the change in our lives.
As a heads up there, if you see a sudden uncharacteristic change or shift, that's where you'd say, okay, let's have a look at this. You still wouldn't be alarmist about it. You just look at it and go, let's put it into the context and see what's happening. The one thing we don't want to be is reactive ourselves as professionals, but it's usually a sudden shift or change. You think that's where you'd start questioning what's going on. Yeah. Okay.
Can I just say too, please do flick through any questions as you're listening. We're very happy to address them as we go, but this is the bit that I'm, I guess, really interested in. I'm conscious of our time, but you were doing these with me before. So top tips for really helping your kids moving between their two homes.
Parent them. is the bottom line, and be, as I said earlier, authoritative parenting. So loving, kind, communicative, but still having those boundaries and rules that existed before the separation. The one thing we hear a lot of, and I know we have a question here that was sent earlier about the differences between families and different rules in two different homes. When you were together, parents tend to parent differently.
Yes.
So children actually are very adept, even the little ones, 2 to 3, are very, very capable of working out, this is how it happens at daddy's home and this is how it happens at mummy's home. So children are actually very good at working between two places and two different models of parenting, because they probably already have. Because very rarely are parents exactly the same. When it comes to actually time sharing, when I've worked out with parents about what is best for the child and how to keep the communication lines open, I use what I call my FIFO model, that if that parent was going to be working away, you're still united as a family, but that parent is working away, how do we keep the communication going anyway? And for some reason, when, say in this example, the father is a FIFO worker, the mother is often quite keen to make sure the child Skypes in or phones in or sends photos regularly on Snapchat or whatever. But all of a sudden, a separation stops that. All of a sudden, we think, wow, what is the difference about separation? Because a few months ago, you were very keen about making sure you're maintaining those communication lines. So I look at when we're working between two homes, it's a FIFO model that children should be able to contact the other parent where appropriate, obviously. If there's, I'm excluding domestic and family violence and anything nasty from our conversations today, but if it's appropriate, children should be flexible and able to contact the other parent and to maintain that relationship and that attachment to that other parent, regardless of how. And now we've got such great technologies. We can use any modality to do it.
And kids now have phones, from what I can tell, from the age of 7, 8, 9, and they'll contact whoever they want, again. Absolutely. From what I can tell.
Yeah.
And they will send images, photos. I had an 8-year-old on Snapchat last week, which is great. It's awesome. Great. But you've got, again, I agree with Maria, there's got to be parenting boundaries. If that's happening at 11 p.m, clearly not great. No. But if it's happening, in the afternoon, this is what we're doing, and we're at the park, hi mum, hi dad, that's awesome. It's such a great thing. Yeah. And you want to be able to facilitate that sort of relationship where Absolutely. It is just part of the day.
Yeah.
It's not like a 6:30, this is what happens.
So when you're working between two homes, parents will have different rules. That was another question we did get beforehand. Unfortunately, we cannot dictate what happens at the other home. But you'd hope both parents would have similar rules and boundaries, but it doesn't always happen. But children get to know, and they will understand, this is what happens in my home and that's what happens in the other home.
Yeah.
So,
and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's not at all, because that's actually a life skill.
Exactly.
Being able to adapt is a life skill. As long as all the behaviour is appropriate, that's the main thing. But there's nothing wrong with having one parent who's laissez-faire and one parent who's authoritative, because children learn, it's a little bit more flexible at that place, and it's more boundaries and rules here. But unfortunately, we cannot enforce the other house what happens over there.
That's right.
Right.
Number 2, shelve the conflict.
Yeah, put it on the shelf. Absolutely. Keep the kids out of it. There's information they just do not need. The one thing is, I'm very, very cautious about languages. I started the talk today. I talked about calling it home. We start talking about I and that place or the other. I've had clients that have awful ringtones on their phone, and to use one, I had a client who hit the identifier, a ringtone for his ex-partner was the bitch is back. And it's those sorts of things that just place a child straight into a level of conflict you just do not need. So just be very, very cautious about what you say to the children, how you say things, and really, I come back to remember what your motivation is. If you're unhappy with that person, that's an adult world thing. That's your problem. That isn't to be shared. Your children should not be the beneficiaries of your stuff.
Yeah.
And that just distresses me so much when I see that sort of behaviour. It's outrageous, but you wouldn't believe how common it is.
That's true. I see it in a good example that I see all the time is the new email address that people decide to create post-separation. Okay. And often it's the email address they decide to use for all of their legal communication, and it'll have some sort of just rude, unnecessary, a little bit like you're saying. Yeah, it's just to me silly, and it's silly particularly in a legal context, because you never know where those emails may end up, particularly if you're in a court process. But just stuff like that, so that every time the husband or wife receives the email, it comes to or from an email address that again has a veiled, unnecessary tone to it.
Yeah, I think and a deliberate poke.
Yeah, and look, part of this comes back to your life values and what you believe. And I've certainly come from a place where, when things are difficult and when people hurt me / I might hurt them, I can't change what's happened. I can only change how I react and deal with any situation. And I think you and I are very on the same page about that thought process. But if you carry that anger and that hurt with you for the rest of your life, it will have a negative impact on your life. If you can let it go, as I say, park some of that stuff, learn from it, work out how you got yourself in that situation, know that you can never control what anyone else does. You can heal yourself, and in the process, I think you can teach your kids some amazingly powerful and important messages for their own lives. And they form relationships, they start work, they have to deal with people, and we're fun.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, I worked with a couple of teenagers a few years ago, and I've never forgotten what they said to me. Children can really teach us some amazing lessons. And I was talking to them about the disrespect shown between their parents. And the one thing, and these girls were probably about 14, 16, and the one thing that has never left my mind is they said every time that parent says something about my other parent, I lose respect for them because they had been raised in a family where mum and dad were very strict around rules, and you don't run people down and you don't disrespect, and they were still trying to adhere those rules in their children, or instill those rules, sorry, in their children, but they weren't doing them themselves. So I actually was amazed by these girls' fortitude in being able to say to their parents, you're breaking your own rules.
Yeah,
and I've never forgotten that.
That must be fun then with a 16-year-old, where the 16-year-old breaks some rules and they're able to then say, well, hang on.
But isn't that interesting? They actually lost respect for the parents saying the wrong thing.
Yeah. I've had a question there from Sarah while you and I have been talking, Marina. Sarah, in terms of our comments around not informing children or not showing children orders, and you've got a very specific question around some teenagers who it sounds like you're not able to speak with at the moment. My view there is that even by showing the kids the orders is probably not going to relieve that issue.
No.
That issue for me is bigger than that.
Yeah.
I would certainly use language with the children that is, there is nothing stopping you from seeing or talking to me, but it sounds like you may not even have the opportunity to express that language. And so for me that's a bigger issue, and I don't know that showing the order is going to get us around that problem.
I'd come at it from a different angle, in that letting them know you're there.
Yeah.
So even though you may not be able to talk or see them, you can. I'm hoping you know their address. You'd send them a card saying "Mummy loves you." I'm assuming, yes, sorry, it's Sarah. You'd send a card saying just "How was your day? Mummy loves you," something like that. So that, mind you, the "Mummy loves you" one might be a bit heavy, but there are other ways of communicating. But showing them the orders wouldn't be a great idea, because once again that's putting the children into an adult world. And teenagers, as I said, they are very, very adept at finding out where the issue lies anyway. But I'd be very, very cautious about showing them, because once again, what is the motivation? And I'm a real advocate for sending just a card, not a letter full of emotional language, just a card that says I miss you, I love you. Something really simple to let them know mum's there.
And I also always talk with people, particularly when they're being excluded from children's lives, about trying to find a way to be in the child's life, not trying to put the child in your life.
Yeah, that's right.
So again, we don't know your circumstances, but an example I had some time ago was with a client of mine who was being excluded, and we were trying to work him back into his kids' lives. So we looked at, for example, school events, extracurricular activities, stuff that the kids genuinely were doing and enjoyed doing, and him just starting to turn up at football or at soccer or whatever was going on, to be a physical present part, not to sort of really push himself on the kids, but just to be on the sideline going, good on you, well done, that's great, nice to see you, off I go. And it was just a great way of sort of opening that door. Yeah, so Sarah's just saying just the words. Yeah, look, I think you can use the words in the sense of saying, I don't even know whether I'd say there's an order. I would just be saying, if you've got the opportunity to speak with them, there's absolutely nothing stopping you guys from communicating with me, talking with me, seeing me, and I'd love the opportunity to. And how would you like to do that?
Yeah. And you're saying that you do send positive text messages, and I'd still say keep sending them.
Yeah.
Because you don't know if he's blocking, and if he is, that's a shame. But I still would say there's nothing like getting a letter. Yeah. Because, children running to the letterbox and it's got their name on them.
And particularly in this day and age when we get so little mail.
Yeah, that's right.
It has a massive impact.
Depending on the ages of the children and the gender.
Yeah.
There's nothing like a letter or a card being sent to them. So you're doing everything you can do, but even just start looking at alternate means as well.
Yeah.
Okie dokie.
So I hope that's helpful, Sarah. Everything is the same but different. I think this is number 3.
Yeah, we're running out of time.
Really talk.
Yeah, okay. This is really about what I was saying earlier about the adjustments. Keep everything as simple and as similar as it was. Same routines, same schedules, everything is pretty much the same, so that the child doesn't have to adjust too readily. But it's also about recognising, once again, that everyone has different parenting styles, but you always did. So I always say keep it as similar as they had to pre-separation, but if it changes, it changes, and that's once again a life skill. It's about being adaptive and resilient as long as it's all managed well.
Transitions.
Oh, this is the biggie for me, it's particularly for the younger ones. This is about managing that handover or that changeover, whatever you want to call it. I call it a transition. And one of the best things, one thing we hear a lot of is the children are really distressed or agitated or full of beans and really energised. It's about transitioning in so that everyone has a routine, and sometimes creating some nice practices around that. So depending on the age of the child and how they respond to going between homes, you might need to have some calm time, and it might be sitting down just watching a movie together or reading a book together, or going for an afternoon tea, or some children might need some play. So it's very much tune it to your child, but start to develop some practices around the transition so the child can predict what happens when we do change over. So the same venue is really handy, the same processes are really handy, because it's all about predictability. And for a child under the age of 6, 7, being able to predict what happens keeps them emotionally calm. It keeps the anxiety out of it.
Bedtime.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of us who, like
those sleep associations,
get to fight with the child every night about bedtime. We all know, thanks to Super Nanny, that the minute we create some routines around bedtime, some predictability, some signals, this is what's happening, letting your child know well in advance. I do it with my daughter anyway. Bedtime is going to be, this is what's going to happen next, this is what we're going to do, next is this, next is that, and not just like right now it's bedtime. So same with the transition process. Today you're going to dad's or you're going to mum's. Why don't we sit down and draw a picture for mummy or for daddy? Like making it a good, nice thing, as opposed to, today's the day. The negative association.
And I think the more you actually normalise the fact that it's daddy's place on Tuesday and mummy's place on Wednesday or whatever, depending on the age, adolescents, upper age children can be involved in the discussions around what they've got to take. So it becomes a normal part of life that this is just it is what it is. There's no positive or negative spin. It's just is what it is.
Erica, I'm going to come to your question in a sec. There's just something else I want to say about transitions that I see all the time at the moment in the legal world, and that is this desire to record transitions, particularly with iPhones. And I just ask anyone just in this scenario to pause for a moment and just imagine what it must be like to be a child who is probably already distressed if you're at the stage of recording, because no doubt that tells me that the conflict and the tension is really difficult. And you're probably going to say to me, but I'm not the one causing it. And you may be exactly right. But you know what? It doesn't matter. Your kid is in the middle of this. And if I've got a child who's young, who's observing mum, who's probably scared, dad, who's probably being a little bit aggressive because he's scared and that's the way he demonstrates that, and then everyone's got iPhones at the ready while we're trying to transfer children in cars, often in car parks at McDonald's with suitcases, it is just a destined disaster.
And the videos I viewed in that, everyone who showed me a video saying, look at this, she's doing that or he's doing that, I always say, and what were you doing? You weren't holding the child.
No, you're videoing. And I've never seen
the phone down.
One of those videos be helpful to the person taking the video in a legal process. I've seen it always backfire terribly.
Because you're too busy showing evidence rather than comforting your child.
What you need to do. So if you're videoing, I encourage you, or recording in any way, I encourage you just to not, put it away. If the transitions between the two of you have become that difficult, then I encourage you to consider some other way of facilitating a transition using other people. There are professionals that can help with that, but certainly other family members, just for a short time. Just break that cycle, because it clearly isn't working. Erica, I will answer your question now around at what age is 50-50 appropriate, and you're not the only person that asked this. We had a number of people send through questions before today. There is no age where 50-50 suddenly becomes appropriate. And the way the law works when it comes to kids is it is always looking at the actual family, the actual children, what is best for those children in that family, taking into account their circumstances. So a couple of generalizations. It would be very rare to see an equal time arrangement, however that's divided up, in a very young child, so a 4-year-old and under. It's very rare. However, I have worked with families where that's exactly what they have, but often their equal time arrangement is not 7 nights, 7 nights. It might be 2, 3, 3, 2, 4. Like there's these smaller chunks that are broken down quite into tiny bits, but it's still in the long term. If you were to add it all up, it'd be equal. But when you look at it from a day-to-day basis, it's achieving what their child needs, which is consistency of time between two homes with regularity.
Yeah. And once again, it comes from a psychology perspective, it always comes down to the conflict.
Yes.
Because it 50-50 requires the most amount of communication.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you can't communicate effectively, it's going to be a disaster no matter what percentage share you have.
What I've seen in the court process, I've seen some interesting changes, I guess, happening lately, and certainly equal time hit its peak, I would say, about four or five years ago, when it seems to be coming off trend. And if you're in court, I think you'll struggle to get to equal time, because court itself creates conflict. And one of the things that the court is required to consider when they're looking at parenting arrangements is the level of conflict, the capacity to facilitate these things. So if you're in court, it's normally a bit of a sign that conflict is high. That's you can't agree. That's why you're there. What I've seen, though, in my work acting for children as an ICL is that often school age, but not prep year, grade 1 here in Queensland, is a time where I have heard consistent evidence from people like Maria that that would be a good time to consider that shift. Because the child's general day routine has moved to a Monday to Friday weekend type regime.
It's more manageable.
And I would just then also add and say 50-50 doesn't mean 7-7-7-7. There are many other ways of achieving some level of equality. And it's about looking at what is right for your child. And it's very normal for different parents, two parents of a child, to have different views about what is right. Yeah. But there isn't any magic age, other than for me to say very young, it's almost, it's very rare for the very young. And as children get older, it becomes more common. And a transition point that I see with some regularity is around grade 1, grade 2. So I'm thinking in my head that's what says, 5, 6 or 7 probably, 6 or 7. And if you're going to make those, she's just turned 4, so I know nothing about your family, Erica, but for me, my immediate reaction to that is it would be unusual. It would be an unusual thing. But if you've got
unless you've got a good relationship with the other parent.
And you've got 2 working parents, for example, and your child's been used to being in the care of others for a long time, and you've had that sort of routine for a long time, then it may be entirely appropriate. But it may be a 5-2-2-5 or a 3-4-4-3 as opposed to a 7-7.
And I'd always come down to 50-50 is not about time in a psychology space.
No.
Psychology space, it's all about equity is what I usually hear. They want to be an equal parent.
Yes.
You don't have to have 50% of the time to do that. That's about, once again, collaborative parenting, sitting down together, if you can, and work out how you can both have a say in these children's lives, but maybe have a different percentage share. So I don't look at 50-50 as being time related. I look at it being equity and attachment and contact with the child.
Sadly, that's often what happens. I know myself, if someone said to me that I would be spending less time with my daughter than my husband would if we were to separate, I would take that as a personal, you're in essence not as good a parent as he is. That's what that says to us at a very human level, and that's a really hard thing to hear. So often what equal time really means to parents is I'm as good as you, I'm as valuable as you to our child, and being able to sometimes just have those frank conversations that this isn't about whether you're a good or bad parent, this is about what is best for our child right now. That's a really hard conversation to have, and often it does need to come from a third party for that to really be explored and heard. Anyway, I'm going to push forward. My place.
This is really, in a real nutshell, because I'm very aware of the time, it's every child should be allowed to have their own space, whether it be at mother's home or father's home, granny's place, wherever. It really comes down to, it's about their identity within that space. I like when there is a high conflict situation that a child has a space they can go to soothe and calm. So that means the things within that space, and this picture is a little teddy bear, but they should be allowed to have their things. Allow your children to move between homes with their things. If something's purchased at mum's place, hopefully they can take it to dad's place as well.
And hopefully it comes
back because that's, once again, a point of entry of conflict. The point of entries of conflict is all around these topics we're talking today. School shirts not coming back. School shoes aren't coming back. That's just an entry point for conflict. But this is about the psychological adjustment of the child, and this is about it being appropriate to your child's needs. So they need very much to know their bed, their space, they've got their toys, they've got their books, and everything is very familiar. If you're re-establishing a home, I always say to my clients, take the children with you and make sure everyone has a say in what's purchased for that house, so they've got a sense of ownership and identity there as well. So really important. Just emotional security again, which leads us on to this one. This is about children, allowing children to grieve. Children, like we will go through the same grief processes and all varying degrees of it. And we should allow them to grieve, and we should allow to normalise it and support them through it. With younger children, just to help them through, sometimes it's really good to get them doing some art therapies. And that's not about therapy. It's about letting them sit down and draw how they feel without any restraint. Older kids, storybooking, journaling, talking, communicating. It's about supporting them through. There are some great programs that help children. There's a wonderful program called Seasons for Grief. It's run out of the Pine Rivers Neighbourhood Centre, and it's specifically designed to help children who are grieving, not just separation, if they've lost an important person in their life. So allow your children to grieve, and I always say every emotion's okay. It's what we do with that emotion. Yeah. So if they're angry, that's okay. It's about sitting and connecting with your child and finding out what's going on for them. And sometimes it's sitting and just holding them and letting them cry.
Yeah. So powerful.
It is. We approach.
The we approach.
Yeah. You hear a lot of people say the team approach. That's really hard when you don't like them.
Yeah.
So I always say the we
just
approach.
Refusing to play on your team.
That's right. That's right. So the we approach is my language around collaborative parenting. Even if you don't have great sentiment for the other person, your child needs to know you're on the same page around them. So it's very much when you talk about them, it's about mummy and daddy, or we're going to do this, or we're both in agreement around you doing swimming lessons, or whatever it is. You speak as if you are on the same page.
Sometimes even when you're not.
No, that's right. Fake it till you make it. I also have a real thing around allowing a child, as I said earlier, about having that space, the my space. In that my space, I think it's super important for that child to have a photo or a memory of the other parent. Mainly because it keeps them connected. I'm not saying have a portrait on the lounge room wall, because that would be very difficult to work with. Mind you, I have some families who have had successful separations that still have family portraits, pride of place, because they're still a family, just reconfigured. So I always say, if you can have some photos, even if you can't stand them being on the nightstand, in the top drawer, that child can actually look at the photo of the other parent and know they're a part of their world. I have another saying, conversate, don't interrogate. So when the child comes home from the other house, talk to them, but don't interrogate them, because they will naturally, the more you don't ask questions, they will, as in interrogation questions, they will love to share their time away. Turn it into an exciting time. Yeah. Tell me what you did. That's fantastic. And the other thing that's really important is, where possible and where safe, I like the parent who's had the child to deliver that child to the other family.
Yes.
Purely because you're sending the message by you being the deliverer that I support you going to this other parent's home. And if it's, once again, if it's manageable, there's no conflict, I very much believe the parent who's had the child should deliver that child to the other family where possible.
Powerful message too. It is. Just in that action.
Absolutely. The sum of us. I love this slide. Isn't it pretty? Because it really tells us that children are more than just mum and dad. They're very much part of an extended family, whether it be family, friends, school groups, connective, any peers, you name it, clubs, sporting clubs. They're more than just the family. And when children are going through distress, particularly those older ages that we spoke of earlier, they need to have friendships and connections outside mum and dad. Yeah. Even in united families, I'm an advocate for kids talking to their aunties and uncles, or a good family friend to help guide them through, because all kids need mentors. So when mum and dad are in crisis, it's really very important for children's attachment to know they're part of a bigger picture.
Yeah.
Particularly with Indigenous children, they need to know that there's that network there.
Yes, of course. And that's
the kinship issues.
Their upbringing.
Absolutely.
Sense, anyway.
Absolutely.
Health and well-being.
Health and well-being. Stress impacts on adults, and we all have felt that along the way. It really impacts on children. As I said earlier, you see a lot of children with stomach complaints and bowel and urinary tract infections and things like that. So health and well-being is really critical to help them through the stress of the period. And that's about good diets, good sleep, plenty of exercise,
Water. The basics.
No junk food. And you know what? That's a time of connection for you too. I always say a little bit of exercise. Take the kids down the road to the park.
Yeah.
Do something novel that you haven't done before. But it's about getting them physically healthy as well as mentally.
Yeah.
Really super important.
And good for us. It's going to help you
absolutely.
manage the stress better.
And this is the one I love. And this isn't for just separated families. This is for every family out there. Don't forget to have fun. One of the best things you can do with your children, and a dear old friend of mine told me this years ago when I was a new mum, and she said, Maria, she had teenagers, and she said, don't forget to laugh. And I've always taken on board because her family was this lovely tight unit, but they had so much fun. So even in this, they saw some significant adversity, and interestingly, their family separated, but that family still laughs and has fun together. They still get together. It was very awkward initially. Oh boy. But they still get together because they actually have light moments, because what happens when you're going through a tough time, everything about us becomes problem saturated.
Yes.
Our conversations, our dreams, our bodies become problem saturated. Everything gets heavy. So by deliberately and purposefully, mindfully, having some joy in our day, it actually lightens the mood for our children as well. And that's even just making cupcakes with them or something that brings some lightness.
Dance party.
Yeah.
That's my favourite.
Party for one in the kitchen. And that's for mums and dads too. Like, don't forget to have fun yourselves. But this is about children need to know that there's some happy times too.
Yes, completely.
Yeah.
So that was our 10 tips.
10 tips.
And I'm just going to fire through the end here because we've gone a little bit over time.
Yeah.
But if there are any other questions, please do flick them through now. Otherwise, I'm here at the firm. Maria does consult here at the firm, but you can also reach her. I'll give you both of our contact details in a short moment. We're happy to help in any way that we can. And otherwise, I just want to say thank you so much for listening, those of you that have been with us live this morning. I know a lot of people are listening in later. And that's where you can find us. And thanks, Maria, because every time I talk to you, I learn something.
Vice versa, absolutely. I'm sorry I talked too long today.
No,
but
it's really
I'd really like to get some ideas for other webinars.
Yes.
So if there's anyone who has any ideas that they have, anything they're struggling with or anything they think would be a great topic, please let us know, because I'd be more than happy to continue talking.
Yeah, absolutely. So by all means, pop that in the comments now, or if you're listening to this later on, you've got my email. So just send us through any suggestions, and we'll be back probably in another 6 or so weeks.
Sounds good.
With another webinar.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, everyone that's been listening.
Thanks very much.
We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.